Good afternoon. I hope you are well awake after all that strong Dutch coffee, because I'm going to take you on a great pace through a little bit of detail about what we're doing at Incisive Media, but more importantly, how some UK publishers are seeing native content as really vital to working with their partners, their people like you. I've tried to confuse you all today by wearing a different shirt, but I'm wearing the same jacket. Right, so I'm going to focus a little bit on content marketing. I'm going to particularly talk about native content and native advertising. But I thought what I'd begin with is just sort of get everybody on the same page, because often when I'm talking to people, we have this expression in my team of people, digital people. It's called cow, pig, chicken. Cow, pig, chicken. And what it basically means is I'm talking to you and you've all got an idea of an animal in your head, and somebody's thinking a pig, somebody's thinking a chicken, somebody's thinking a cow, and we're all nodding. And then when we eventually produce the product, they go, but I thought it was a chicken, and I've produced a pig. They get very confused. So if we can just talk about the same thing, what is content marketing? For me, it's the publication of material designed to promote a brand. So going back to that impartiality, there is an objective behind it, but it should be impartial, usually through a more oblique and subtle approach. So what that basically means is it's not an ad, it's not in your face, as we would say in the UK. It's very much about giving the viewer something they want. So in terms of making that connection between the content and what they want, it usually is helpful if you can work with a partner to make sure you're targeting the right content to the right people. And going back to what Andrew was saying, it's about that niche. It's not a big idea like we make stuff. It's a very specific thing like we've got this thing that does this particular thing for people that need this solution. And content marketing can take loads and loads of different forms. I'm going to particularly talk about native advertising today. And it was alluded to in that quote. Sometimes you regret quotes. I've never regretted quotes ever. But it does make me think a little bit more about what I said to the team here. I do stand by the fact that it should be truthful. Because actually, if you've got customers and you're trying to sell them things, you don't want to sell them lies. So you have to think about some of the adverts maybe have been produced over the years that are on the borderline of truthful. Content will be seen through as not being truthful if it isn't. So that's a really key kind of differentiator. So native advertising, I'm going to get onto that. So I thought I'd start with a bit of data. I like the idea of content being a fuel that's sort of driving marketing, as it says here. And these are facts from Content Marketing Institute benchmark report. It's a US body this year, 2015, so it's bang up to date. 90% of digital marketers now use content marketing, so it's very mainstream. 80% of buyers prefer learning about a brand through content rather than advertising. So that's the kind of the essence of what we're here to talk about. Why is that good? And then 69% of marketers are producing more content than in the prior year, whether that's newsletters, as we've heard with Andrew, or whether it's other specific things. It could be tweet, it could be blogs, it could be all sorts of things, but they're producing a lot more content. And so obviously if you're making content, you want people to read it, and you want people to react to it, and you want some people to do something with that content, ideally get in touch with you, ideally start engaging with you. Now, this is a guy called Seth Godin. Funnily enough, he's got the same glasses, I think, as Andrew. That's quite good. So there's a nice little link there. And he basically said content marketing is the only marketing left. It's something that's sort of, we're probably going to talk about with the other panelists later on. I don't totally agree with Seth. I'm saying, sorry, Seth. I don't agree with you. I would prefer to use another one of your ideas, so I'm sort of giving him credit. And you've got to read this carefully. It's almost, I think, what would be called a double negative in English. So finding new ways, more clever ways to interrupt people doesn't work. So what he's basically saying is a lot of marketing is trying to get in your face. It's trying to get in the way of what you're doing to basically get the message over to people. It's what's called push marketing in some circles. And actually, while that has it does work, it doesn't work as well as something that isn't in your face, something that isn't trying to interrupt you. So if you think about that for a second, if somebody is doing something, they're on a website, they're on a video channel, they're reading, they're watching, they're interacting with something they've chosen to do, the worst thing you can possibly do is start flashing things all over the place and start giving them stuff they're not asking for, stuff they're not interested in. You're interrupting them. And that's what a lot of kind of modern marketing has become with the internet. It's trying to grab that space. And it might allude to the fact that Andrew mentioned earlier, which is we think of our own websites, our own activities as being the center of the universe. So in the multi-screen world, so the multi-screen world in my mind is all those little phones, all those tablets, it's desktops, it's also screens you come into contact with actually on your way to work. Increasingly in London, there's a lot of video advertising on trains. It could actually be interacting with an Xbox. It doesn't have to be a conventional device, but it's using a screen in place of something else. In the multi-screen world, and people are moving between screens, we're not competing for attention between adverts and content anymore. It's moving on from that. It's about activity, what people are doing, and the screens they're on. As it says here, this is a Google slide. Majority of media consumption is screen-based. That's 90% of our media consumption is now screen-based. It's very easy to interrupt people on screens, as I've mentioned. So thinking what screens are on, where they're on them. And then 90% of consumers use multiple screens sequentially. So they use screens sort of almost in the same way that you might pick up a pen, write on a piece of paper. They don't see devices as being that important or as important anymore. So they're moving between devices to do things. So activity in screens is very important. How much time they've got. So typically smartphone use about 17 minutes a day per interaction, 30 minutes on a tablet and so on. TV's still the biggest, but digital's catching up. And then finally, the context of the device. So where are they? You know, if I'm standing outside a restaurant and I'm just trying to find a review of the restaurant, I'm very time poor. I've got a very specific need. Am I going to go in and actually eat something, or am I going to walk down the street and find another restaurant? It could be what I'm trying to achieve. I'm looking for a holiday. I'm looking for that car. I'm trying to compare prices. It could be how much time I've got. I've got 5 minutes. I've got to get that chart down off that website so I can do that PowerPoint presentation. Or it could be the attitude, state of mind. I'm at home. I want to relax. I want to watch TV. I want to read. Okay, so those devices and how much time, the context of it is very, very important. And then finally, you know, what content they're consuming on what sites, how long are they consuming it for, and more importantly, by who. And one of the really big problems with cookies, and most modern marketing is based on cookies, is cookies are really, really shit. They're not very good at actually providing detailed information about the user. All they can really do is just tell you something has, somebody has used a particular page. You don't necessarily know who they are. And then more importantly, if, as in this situation, devices are being shared by a group of family members, it could well be that the dad is the person that you want to target. In actual fact, the kid is on the device. Totally wasted kind of advertising and marketing. So how do we get around that problem? I'll talk about that in a moment. So remember what Seth said, don't interrupt me. Finding new ways, more clever ways to interrupt people doesn't work. So just remember that. Understanding then who the users are that are coming to websites or coming to your sites, what content they want, what they're consuming, on which devices. Are they on a phone? Are they on a big screen? What's the connection sometimes? When in the day are they doing it? That might go back to publish at a particular time of the week that we've already discussed already. Where, the context of, are they on the move? Are they at a desk? Are they at home? Which will impact them a little bit. And then why? That is in essence what content marketing is all about. It's actually understanding that. Now, I would argue, obviously, because I am a publisher, that publishers and media companies are in a really good position to help you do that, because despite all the mistakes we might have made over the whole digital revolution, we're still very much about putting buyers and sellers together through the media that we produce. And so working with content partners is possibly quite a good way to go. So what's the value, therefore, of working with a premium content partner, a premium content partnership? There's the actual production of the content. There's the association it then has with quality brands. Brands very often that go back to that point that was made earlier about trust. Brands that your consumers and our readers trust. And then more importantly, the depth of information that's on the site. It's not just about that one thing. There's many things going on. There's conversations. There's different threads, different themes. It's very zeitgeisty. As the news agenda changes, the content on the site changes. There's generally a deeper level of engagement with media brands because media brands are trusted. And generally, there's a stronger story if you're using those media brands to actually embed content in them because it's just part of the mix. It's part of what that site is offering their users, their trusted, loyal users. So in my view, the value of a premium content partnership is it strengthens your brand values because associating your brand with strong other brands is good. And I'll talk about that later. And then it effectively positions your brand as a trustworthy brand as well. Now, we've got a quick question here because I think this was asked to you before you signed up or when you were signing up. But I thought it'd be quite a useful exercise to do this again. So we're going to switch over to the voting system and we're going to ask these questions. Okay. Whoa. That must be one person's hit that. Oh, no, there you go. Okay, content creation. So what I've tried to do is list a series of things there that I think are possibly barriers to thinking about content marketing. There's obviously the issue of, have I got the right people? Have I got enough time in my day? I'm so busy, I've got other things to do. What am I going to write? How am I going to write it? Who's going to write it? The actual process of creating the content. How am I actually going to be confident that that's going to generate leads, the right volume of leads, quality leads? Who on earth is going to manage it? Because it's not advertising, right? So is it a campaign? How does it get managed? Have I got the budget? Luckily, that doesn't look like that's a problem. And then how am I going to measure it? How am I going to know whether it was effective or not? So look, that looks pretty good to me. I'm not going to come back to that, but it suggests to me that content creation time and the issue about leads are the biggest issues there with how do I measure results. Okay, let's move back. Looks like everyone's got the budget. That's great. If anybody wants a card later, I love the fact you've got budget. Okay, let's move on. So I would say that a lot of content marketing is now really about native advertising. And what I mean by native advertising is it's content created with the media brand in a partnership that sits within the content stream of the publisher. What that means is we write the content for you, and we put it onto our site as if it's our content. Now, that goes back to my quote. That means that we're not just going to lie. We're not just going to produce bad content. We're not just going to sell a story, flog a dead horse. We're going to want to find what's interesting about that piece of content or that story, in much the same way that you want to find interesting things to read about as users of sites. And we're going to then work with you to say, look, that actually you're saying this, but we really think this is what the story is. Let's work that angle up, if you agree. And then we produce that content, you sign the content off, and we put it into our site. So therefore, native ads match the visual design of the site. They work within the experience of the site. They look and feel like the natural content of that site. And therefore, they've got to be consistent with the site experience. And they have to function like natural content. So it goes back to my quote. It has to be well-produced, accurate, truthful, those things. Now, there are kind of 5 key things in my mind that are vital ingredients of effective native advertising. I've separated the last one, 5, don't hard sell, because in the research that was done around this, and this is linked to the AOP research that I'm going to talk about later. AOP stands for Association of Online Publishers. It's a UK trade body that represents publishers in the UK. So it's got people like the BBC, ITV, Sky, publishers like us, Incisive Media, Reed Elsevier, all these kind of publishers, about 50 publishers. It's a non-for-profit organisation where we try and help each other and actually understand what's happening in the market. So the AOP produced this research with end users in this instance. And the one thing they all said was, don't hard sell. If you do the other things well, so it has to be attractive, it's got to be something that's going to be an interest to me, it's got to be obvious, transparent and clear, it's got to be very engaging, i.e. interesting, it's got to actually be credible, it's got to show that you've got some expertise in terms of this content about what you're writing about. If you do all those things really well, all of them can totally be undermined by hard selling. because then it looks like you're trying to convince somebody of something they're not so interested in. That's the issue there. Some examples, very simple examples of native content. Now, in this instance, I've actually deliberately chosen one with a picture that is a logo, IBM. The reason I've chosen that is often if we're doing a story about IBM, we might actually use that very same graphic on some of our sites. Equally, we could have had a picture of a computer, a person, a tree, whatever it might be useful to illustrate that particular story. So you've got a sense of what native advertising is. You've got a sense of what I mean by content marketing. What I'm now going to do is to give you some examples of research from the UK about how end users react to native advertising on sites. So this is the AOP native advertising study I mentioned to you. The way it was conducted during the tail end of last year, so it was conducted last autumn, published in March, was 1,500 online surveys. We didn't do very much on phones and tablets. It was mostly on desktop computers. And then it was accompanied by some face-to-face interviews and accompanied surf. What that actually means is we sat with users as they were using websites to see what they did and how they behaved, and accompanied surf. So the media brands that were used, hopefully some that you will recognize. Mirror is a tabloid newspaper in the UK. Marie Claire, I'm sure you're familiar with here, a high-end women's magazine. The Week is a condensed weekly newspaper produced by Dennis about what's happening in the world, a bit like Business Week, New Statesman, that kind of thing. Huffington Post, I'm sure you're very familiar with. And then BBC Good Food is a magazine about food that the BBC produces to go with some of its TV programs. You could argue that is native content. And then the brands that were engaged in the study were these brands, the Cooperative Food Store. That's basically a kind of independent supermarket in the UK. Who Can Fix My Car is a kind of new startup site that tries to get car repairs cheaper. It's a bit like Money Supermarket for cars, that kind of thing. Max Factor, you're very aware of. That's obviously a makeup cosmetics company. Lloyds Bank, but this is the private banking bit of Lloyds Bank. So most people have bank accounts. Few people have private bank accounts. And then Tu is a clothing brand that is owned by another supermarket, Sainsbury's. So what basically happened is the page had two positions on it, those two grey boxes. In one, there was an advert that was shown to the whole sample, and in the other one was a piece of native content, native advertising, sitting next to it. Okay? And if you clicked on the native content, you'd obviously go into the article. In this instance, it's, going back, it's an article about who can fix my car. So there's the advert for the company. Here's the piece of native content about car repairs, and when you go into it, BMW versus Audis versus Mercedes, how much does it really cost to run a top German car? So it's quite useful content. In fact, Drew should have read that before he bought the Mercedes. The comparison on how the respondents basically arrived at the native content was basically looking at which people clicked on the ad to go to the content, which people clicked on the native piece to go to the content to get that differential. That's how it was calculated. And then it was put into a funnel. So I'm delighted that we had the concept of funnels earlier. This is a slightly different funnel. I think it's broadly the same concept. Maybe we can discuss that on the stage later on. So we're basically saying, okay, there's a discovery phase. People are looking for things. There's a trust phase where they're buying into what they're looking for. They're going, yeah, that looks about right. There's a word of mouth phase where they're going, hey, you'll never guess what. I had this great thing today happen to me, or I read. They're starting to tell their friends. And then there's a final bit, which is, yeah, I'm going to buy that, purchase it. So all stages of this funnel we discovered in this piece of research were totally enhanced by native content. And what I've got here are some quotes from anonymized users. So in this instance, this is on Lloyd's private banking in the week. I thought this was a really interesting way of presenting an advert through an article. It really gripped me, left me thinking I need to go and look at Lloyd's. This is new for a bank. It's a good thing. It'll attract more articulate customers, a reader who is interested in this. Female, 27 years old. You want that kind of reaction, I would say. The next one, trust, building trust. I've been reading the Mirror for years and years, so this is the concept about trusted media brand, Mirror the newspaper. I've been reading the Mirror for years and years, so I trust them to know what they're talking about. So in this instance, the person actually saw the content as editorial, even though it was flagged up as being independent. That's a 51-year-old guy who's a reader of the Mail. Word of mouth. In this instance, 1 in 3 agreed that the native ad made them more likely to talk to their friends or a family member about the brand or about the product that they'd been reading about. And then the final one, purchase. I've never really thought about buying clothes in Sainsbury's, but after seeing this, I'll bet I'll be really pleasantly surprised about what they've got to offer. Female, 35 years old. Now, what's interesting about that is like you do, I showed these slides to my wife, God knows why, because I just thought she might be interested. She was interested. I felt like a bit of a Burke showing her. But she said, I didn't know you could buy clothes in Sainsbury's. So, wow, that sort of works. Now, here's the uplift versus traditional advertising. So remember, there were 2 things on the page. There was that native, there was that advert. We tracked the difference between whether they clicked on the native content or whether they clicked on the advert. What you can see here is that basically all of them were significantly enhanced. The biggest enhancement was discovery, so actually finding out about these products. I didn't know Audis were more expensive to repair than Mercedes, for example, could be one of the things they found out. The trust bit, the fact that they buy into the brand, the quote from the Mirror guy, enhanced. They saw that as reliable content. Then the word of mouth, telling people, 1 in 3. Okay? So, does that surprise anybody? No, probably not. So what's the power of native advertising? What I've tried to do here is I've put on the left-hand side of the chart the native drivers, the pieces of content you saw. So you can see that car repairs one, second from bottom that we saw earlier. And then on the right-hand side, I've got the accompanying traditional adverts. And what you can basically see is the click-through rate on the native content was 31% bigger, averaged across the tested campaigns. So basically, there were almost a third more clicks than standard on the native pieces. So it was definitely driving people through to read the content. And as was being said earlier, if you start to get people to engage with the content and read the content, you're on the journey, you're on the funnel. Because if you've done it right, if you've produced it in the right kind of way, it's independent, trustworthy, reliable, accurate, truthful, the things I've mentioned before. It's produced to a high standard, and it's interesting. More importantly, it is interesting. You are basically going to get people moving down that funnel to purchase. Looking at another way, users find native ad drivers more informative and interesting, most importantly. That's not necessarily a surprise, because obviously, there are very few conventional adverts that are truly interesting and informative. They might tell you things, or they might be visually stunning, but obviously reading something or watching something is clearly going to be more informative and interesting. Usefulness, 21% more. That's a great one. Eye-catching ads just about tip it, but not so much, 23 versus 21%. Clear and easy to understand, again, not so much. It's obviously an advert. Is native content obviously trying to sell you something or not? Don't know. But the users were a bit unsure about that. And they also found it much less ordinary, which is probably good. That's good. It's more unusual, that means, I think, if you look at it the other way around. So basically, consumers appreciate native advertising. 59% find native ads interesting. 14% didn't find native ads interesting. That's a really key sort of finding. But we thought about conventional advertising. So we started to look through telephone interviews and things about adverts that were running and then how it had been supported with native campaigns. So this is partly why I don't agree with Seth. I don't think content marketing is the only marketing left. I think content marketing is possibly the most important marketing, but there are lots of other things you need to do in and around your marketing campaign. And it looks to me, from the findings of this particular study, that actually having native advertising supporting conventional advertising in and around the place elsewhere actually gives you an uplift boost, and in this instance, 38 percentage points. So basically, it was adding to the effect of the advertising elsewhere by having native content on a collection of sites. And this wasn't just on the sites that the advert was running on, The Week, etc. It was on other sites. And if you think about good brand advertising, supported by good editorial. That is a pretty obvious finding, I would say. So, to recap, what native ads offer when compared with traditional ones, and remember my definition for native, sort of read content marketing in the widest sense, because I think most content marketing is starting to become native, because native, in a way, is the ultimate form of content marketing. It's embedded within the publisher's stream, whether that's video or words. Basically, native ads, compared with traditional ones, widen the purchase funnel by nearly 30%. They increase clicks by just over 30%. If they're done well, informative, interesting, useful, and helpful. They support traditional ads to maximize the impact, as that last slide showed. They encourage consumers to spend time with your brand, because they're reading about your brand if you've chosen the right thing. That's a really good thing. It rubs off. If you think about major purchases, we heard about car purchasing before, but think about house purchasing. When I'm looking, the last time I looked to buy a house, I knew where I wanted to live, but I started to go to the estate agents that I was aware of. I didn't just walk around and walk into any estate agent, because certain estate agents, realty agents, I don't know what they're called in Holland, if everybody understands what an estate agent is, certain estate agents have a better reputation for me than other estate agents. Why have they got a better reputation? Well, they've done a lot of advertising and marketing to me over the years, and it's what Drew was saying is the first thought about who the person's going to be. So it encourages, it harnesses the power of premium content websites. So what I mean by that is, if I've spent basically millions of pounds building a digital business, putting content together, employing journalists, driving users to it, isn't that a really good place to put content that you want your users to read too, if we've helped produce it? Obviously it is, because that's where the marketplace is. Access to audience and database of premium content websites, so all the things that we can do with advertising, we can start to do with native advertising. So we can start to segment, target, I'll talk about that in a moment. And then the expertise and resources of the premium content publisher. So it goes back to the fact that it's a kind of partnership. You're working in unison with somebody who's got the same objectives as you. We want people to be informed, entertained, interested, and we also want to work with you to get results, because the more results we get for you, the more you'll spend with us, the more you'll work with us to get better results, and so it goes on. So with B2B premium media, so the kind of publications that Incisive has, or the kind of publications that VAC Media has, I would argue this effect is amplified. There was a question earlier about B2B versus B2C. Well, there's quite a lot of differences, but in effect, they're still consumers. They might be professional consumers of things, B2B people, whether they're buying accounting systems, or whether they're buying a new hydroelectric plant, or whether they're buying a fleet of cars, or whether they're just buying stationery for an office. They are still consumers of things. But a big difference with B2B and B2C is that in many, many instances, the B2B audience is logged in, because a lot of B2B publishers have valuable content that they're either putting a wall up, a freemium wall, where you get access by registering for free, or in many cases, a paid subscriber. And we heard that comment earlier about subscribers being very, very valuable. So in my business, we have a lot of subscribers, people that have paid. We also have sites that are freemium. There's a wall. But what they all have in common is that little guy there is logged in, and we know who it is, JB in this instance. So they have a unique identifier, and that unique identifier is their email address. And just think about unique identifiers for a moment, because I said cookies were not very good. I used a different word last time. I think that might be the wrong word to use, but cookies are not great. They're a 90s technology. They track the device, not the user. They can be wiped off the device very easily. But an email address is a very different thing, because if you're logging into something, and think about all the times you log into things, think how precious your email address is. Think how precious your email, your mobile phone number is as another identifier. You don't really give that information out very often. And generally, email addresses don't change a lot. Yes, you have corporate email addresses, but very often we ask a question like, what's your security email address? What's your second email address, your Gmail, Hotmail address? So very often we have 2 emails for people. It's a unique identifier, and every time you come onto a site, every time you access a service, every time you download something from iTunes, every time you basically interact with the site, you're logged in. We know who you are, and we take that email address and we convert it into an alphanumeric number using a very old piece of technology which seems to have become more popular now, called MD5 hash. You don't really need to know that. That's just a sort of geeky thing. What it basically means is it takes an email address and it makes it into a load of numbers like that. And what that is a load of numbers that are totally unique to you or to the user that are related back to that email address. So basically, when they come onto various products and services, phones, tablets, desktops, they interact with us, we're immediately looking up that ID, that anonymized ID, we're finding it, we're going, okay, that's JB. And why that's important in premium publishing environments, and why, going back to native advertising, why this is a very significant issue, it's because we want to be able to track users across devices so that increasingly you're buying users, not buying cookies, or buying impressions on a phone or impressions on a desktop. And think back to that photograph of the family in bed. With this particular login, the kids won't be identified. The dad's logging in. It's JB. It's JB. If the kids go onto the site, they have to log in. Unless the dad has told them, they won't know. So it's very important, because if we then start linking that to the content they're accessing on our sites, including native content, what we're able to do is we're able to track their activity and we're able to qualify them as leads. Now, I've put a few different things up here, but probably the most important one in terms of qualifying is that second one, research paper. That actually is a piece of native content that we produced for IBM. It was research with our users about what attitudes were to, in this instance, I think, big data. Very topical subject. We made it into a research paper, and you could only download the research paper if we knew who you were. You had to log in. You had to give us your email address and access the paper. So what? Okay, went onto a website, downloaded a piece of collateral. Well, the reason it's important, and the reason I asked the question about lead nurturing, is that you don't just do that one thing on the website, you go off and do other things on the website. And obviously, if I know who you are, jb@incisivmedia.com, or unintelligible long number, as it is up here, I'm able to start seeing the other things you're doing and remind you, nurture you about the fact you downloaded that white paper. So in very many instances with the research papers, what we're actually doing is reminding them about the product they've engaged with because we know who they are. And so you're sort of starting to close the loop on the attribution. Why qualify leads? I think it's pretty obvious. There's 2 quotes here. One's from Gartner. Up to 70% of sales leads are not properly leveraged or are completely ignored, thus wasting marketing program dollars. And then one from Marketing Sherpa, which is a quite reliable online site for marketeers. 61% of B2B marketers send all leads directly to sales. However, only 27% of those leads will be qualified. And we have a very good example from years ago, actually, when I was working with Ruud at VNU with IBM, that they came to us because they were advertising at that time their e-commerce products on television, and they were getting lots of people phoning up and lots of people responding to the email who just liked the sound of what they were doing, and they were getting so much response from their TV advertising, they couldn't actually identify the people that were going to buy this solution. There were people that were just interested in what it was all about who were contacting them. And so that's a good example of that 27% of leads not being qualified. And going back to that nurturing point, we know from the research we've done with our clients that when somebody has actually interacted with a piece of content and generally downloaded that content in the instance of a research paper, it takes up to 3 to 4 weeks for the person that owns that content, i.e. you, to get in touch with them. And so if we're actually able to nurture them during that 3 or 4 weeks and remind them, it's less likely that when some of your sales guys get on the phone and go, I see you're interested in big data, you're not going to get, am I? I didn't know I was, because they've forgotten they downloaded the white paper. It's quite a critical part of that loop. So what makes a lead qualified in my mind? It's linked to implicitly what they're doing, what they're interacting with. The ultimate kind of implicit engagement is somebody gives you a card at a trade show, that last thing. But there's lots of techniques online to sort of qualify that. If you go back to the identifier again, and we're tracking what they're reading, we're building up profiles of what readers are reading, and we're able to serve them content that's more interesting to them. There's the subscription themselves. Try lists are pretty important. People that are trying out the product for us, they're also using content that's interesting for you. And then there's that explicit fit. Have they got the money? Are they actually buying? Are they somebody who's just interested in it, who isn't really a proper lead? How big are they? How many employees have they got? Are they the right kind of company, B2B, B2C, that kind of thing? So what we tend to do, and I'm sure it's the same at VAC Media, is we will qualify those leads using those kind of technologies. So to conclude, I would say that the value of premium content partnerships are pretty obvious. It creates significant engagement with audiences, I hope, as that research study shows to you. Helps position brand perceptions, that trust, likelihood to buy, likelihood to give word of mouth. It educates consumers in an environment they already trust, that trusted media brand. It drives recommendations because they're telling other people, they're buying stuff. We see a big connection between native content and likes as well on social media. And if it's done right, it's going to strengthen core values. So we know through AOP research or own clients research that premium content environments improve the consumer's perceptions of advertisers and act as a driver for better results. And in B2B environments, using that technique I've described to you, they also deliver better qualified leads. So thanks for listening to me. And if you want to get in touch, please use one of these.